Hello, welcome to part 2 of FEC-TV's Europe special. I'm joined today by Jay Kelly and our special guest, Dr. Alan Noonan, PhD and Europhile. I'm going to kick this show off today with a simple question for you both. Are we now more Irish than European? And I'm going to go straight to you, Alan.
Well, I think we remain sort of Irish, despite the fact that I think most Irish people are very pro-European. I think the sort of scepticism that has crept into Irish people has crept in because they sense that there's a sort of pervasive injustice after creeping into the European project with this whole bailout mechanism, bailing out the biggest banks, the too big to fail, the idea that no one is responsible for the sort of disaster that has befallen the Greek people, the Irish people, Spanish people to a lesser extent. I think that that's why people have grown tired of the European project, not because they don't like Europe, not because they're anti-Europe. I think that...
I suppose it's the idea that the ordinary citizens out there only see Europe being set up to help big business, the banks, the Central European system, rather than themselves as as people in austerity measures.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like, I think you can see this whole pro-European tone of the Irish people, not simply from the euro coins jangling in people's pockets and the fact that they can go out and travel to the rest of Europe and spend that money, the ease of travel around Europe and things like that, but also by the fact that Irish people have travelled in the boom years, and I think they still continue to travel, and they've seen what the rest of Europe is like, and they've seen that there are cities that are cleaner, less litter, and I think they've brought that back to Ireland as well. But also, on a more practical sense, every time they go into a pub, what sort of beers can you see? Before, you could only see maybe Carlsberg, Murphy's, Guinness, and that was about it on tap in Irish pubs. Now there's a whole range of options. People are after bringing back variety with them, and I think that the whole idea...
So the European project, good for beer, basically.
Well, yeah, but I think it's the practical way that people are seeing it. Yeah, I think diversity...
Jay, jump in on this.
Okay, are we more Irish than European, you're asking, yeah?
I am.
Okay, the truth of the matter about Irish people is that we're whatever suits us at a particular time. I mean, 100 years ago we were Irish, but we could certainly be British when that suited us as well and join the British Army, for example. Right now it's a case that, well, we're starting to be a little bit more Irish. We're Irish when it suits us when we're travelling, but let's be honest with you, the money in our pockets is European money. We're bought and paid for by Europe, so I would say that's the bottom line. And even just, let's say, how people see themselves. I think psychologically people have very much adjusted to the idea of themselves as European. They like the fact that they can travel and live anywhere in Europe. And then, let's say, another part of it as well is that what are we going to do without Europe? I mean, and from a legal point of view as well, the European Court of Justice is the supreme law in Ireland, and that in a very practical way makes us European.
I mean, I take both of your points. I think coming from the UK perspective, I mean, we've always considered ourselves outside of Europe. We've always considered ourselves as something different. And I think that we see the European project as something, being imposed upon people, this sort of ogre coming out and, putting these sort of oppressive things on people. I mean, is that actually creeping into Ireland? Because, when you go out on the streets and you talk to people about the bailouts and about austerity, they're pretty angry. They're pretty angry people.
Well, yeah, people are pretty angry now. I mean, like, what you have to realise is that in the Irish mentality, in the Irish character, there's a certain element of the prostitute, okay? And that's what I mean by the whole thing of being bought and paid for. People are very angry about Europe now. They're angry about the Troika. They're angry about the idea of being controlled from outside.
So you're saying when the money flows back in, they'll be happy?
20 years ago, when we were getting billions into our pockets, when the roads were being built, when people were getting building jobs as builders, certainly they weren't angry about Europe at that point. When money was coming in through the Common Agricultural Policy, people weren't angry about that money coming in. None of these things seemed to anger people, but now all of a sudden it has turned around. And to be honest with you, I actually have a lot of sympathy for people on that one as well, because when you think of it, when you actually see the downside to being in Europe, that's when the questions arise, and that's when you actually see all the flaws in terms of the lack of democracy.
So where would Ireland be, essentially, now, without Europe? Where would we be? If Ireland had a vote tomorrow, we say get rid of the euro, where would Ireland be?
I don't think that Ireland is going to go anywhere from the European project. Where would it be? Disaster. I think that it would be a problem to withdraw from the European project. People put forward ideas that we might be like Switzerland, that we might be like Norway, that we might be able to negotiate our way through a globalised economy better on our own than with Europe, I think that's totally fantasy. But going back to what you were saying about Britain and it seeing itself as being imposed by Europe, I think that's a great irony of history, that Britain, a nation which has for so long imposed its own rigorous mechanisms on ourselves, for example,
Excellently done.
now sees itself as being imposed, whereas the Irish, in fact, the EU project has been so interesting in that we're going to it as a nation amongst other equals. And I think that Irish people recognise that at least we have some sort of voice at the table, whereas the British, for some strange reason, they kind of see it as this sort of, like you said, you're right on, it's an imposition, even though it's not. It hasn't been an imposition. For example, the bailout that we've had to get has been because our political leaders decided to bail out all 3 of our banks. They could have let one of them go to the wall, 2 of them go to the wall, maybe even let all 3 of them go to the wall like Iceland did with its bank, and maybe we might be in a recovery right now. But it was our decision of the political leaders to bail out those banks, and then we had to go begging for help from the EU, and it's the EU that has stepped up to the plate and helped us. So we think of it as an imposition. Now they might be telling us what to do with our own money, but I think it practically...
Do you think it felt as more of an imposition because there was, a lack of dialogue with the people there, that it was a political decision taken outside of the actual Irish people, that, these decisions that went on in, the back rooms, etc., the phone calls to the, ECB, to the Troika, etc., there wasn't that dialogue there, and that's why people get angry about it.
Yeah, I think you're quite right. And I think that Irish people would actually be protesting on the streets had there not been an election a few years ago that kind of sucked the anger out of the Irish people. And so they were willing to give this new government a chance. And, the anger is slowly returning back into the Irish system.
It does certainly seem to be. Yeah. I mean, in terms of the euro itself, let's talk about the currency itself. If obviously UK, we're out of it, Iceland's doing pretty well with its own currency, being able to devalue, etc. Where would Ireland be in terms of not leaving the European project, but leaving the currency?
I think it would be a problem. In the 1980s, the same thing happened. We were taken advantage of by these currency speculators, and because the punt was just this small little currency on its own, it was totally manipulated and taken advantage of, and the government lost billions on that. So to think that we can survive on our own, I think is unfortunately a false idea. I think our grasping onto this 12.5% of our corporate tax rate is also a fallacy. I think we should be putting forward progressive ideas about being able to tax businesses at a level where governments get money back from them. 12.5%, okay, fine. But in actual fact, the big businesses that come here for that are only coming here to take advantage of that, and then take advantage of even lower tax rates in Bermuda and places like that. So in fact, we are prostituting ourselves, these businesses like Google, Microsoft, whereas in fact, we should be part of a global solution to making corporations who make billions pay their fair share in society. And that's a slightly different problem from the European project. But we've been sort of, oh no, we're going to do our Irish thing. We're going to hold on to our 12.5% corporate tax rate. And it ties into the problem that the Irish government really just has a lack of leadership, a lack of vision.
To be honest with you, I'd agree with a lot of what Alan said there, except for the point about getting rid of the 12.5% corporation tax. I agree with you that we're prostituting ourselves out there, but you know what? We really have no other option. I mean, Ireland is not a country that is going to make any great impact one way or the other. We're definitely not a country that's going to come up with some sort of native Google or a native Samsung or Nokia or Ericsson or anything like that. I mean, the closest we have to an indigenous exporting industry is Guinness, and that's owned by Diageo now. So I mean, it's not really Irish anymore anyway. I mean, like.
All right, well, let me take this in a different angle. In terms of the sentiment that's around Europe now, do you think it's an anti-European sentiment, as it clearly quite is in the UK, or do you think it's an anti-austerity element? Because frankly, I mean, I look at this and I see, as a UK citizen, we get told, it's an injustice. It's politics, versus economics, and that, the actual will of the people doesn't come into it very much. We're taught to hate the French, of course, but the common agricultural policy, taking all the the billions out of that, looking at the ECB and the bailouts, etc., of the banks, is it an anti-austerity or is it anti-European?
Well, if I'll take that one, I would be happy to. For my greatest example of to show that it actually isn't anti-Europe, it's anti-austerity, is the flags that the Greek people are waving are Spanish and Irish when they're protesting at their parliament as well. They see a united European front against these measures which are targeting the weakest and the most vulnerable in our society. So that's I think the feeling as well within the Irish people. What the Irish people and the Greek people and I think peoples around Europe as well, to a lesser extent in Central Europe, are looking for is political leadership, political vision. And there's just a simple lack of that at the moment.
The problem here is, though, that those austerity measures that you say, they're waving the flags, they're against the austerity. That austerity is being imposed upon them by a Central European system. Now, I would suggest that the Central European system itself is inherently flawed.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, but you have to remember at the same time that national governments are the ones that are ultimately responsible within the European project.
Well, responsible to a degree, but the Irish government can't turn around and say no to the Troika without a large consequence coming from it.
Absolutely not, especially after it made the decision to bail out the three banks. So that was where the decision made, the political decision. In the same case with the Greek leaders, I mean, like the problems with the Greek economy were for the last decade. They weren't simply just for the last
No,
few
but I
years
mean, at the moment, Europe pretty much has a few countries by the balls, basically.
Absolutely.
And it's a situation where you've got people suffering and people going through austerity. But I think they should be more angry at the whole European project because
well, I mean, like they should be more angry. If you look at it this way, Ireland, Greece, all these countries that are caught by the balls, put themselves there themselves. One good thing about the whole thing is that they need reform. A country like Ireland needs reform. A country like Greece needs reform. And my God, now it's going to happen. Now it will happen. And one of the things as well,
but is it happening? Because Greece has gone through 8, 9, 10 months of this. Not a lot is actually happening except further and further bailouts.
Absolutely, yeah. But I mean, like once they actually start turning the cash flow off a little bit more, once things get, and as bad as things are there, once they get even worse, once people actually see that, okay, once they could get the drachma back, but devalue it, and then what happens after that? You've still got an absolutely corrupt, inefficient country.
I remember listening to Brian Lehinen at Béal na Bláth when he gave the first speech as a Fianna Fáil minister, Fianna Fáil spokesman at this Fine Gael rally, what had been basically a Fine Gael rally at that point. And he was saying back, I think this was 2010, and he was saying, we're about to turn the corner. We're about to turn the corner. Every time somebody talks about these austerity measures, about to change things or improve things, it's always, oh, well, the next time things are going to get better. The next year things are going to... They're not going to get better because any economy where you draw money out of the economy in a recession,
that's
it's totally fantasy. And
absolutely, yeah. But I mean, when I say about a more long-term reform kind of a thing, I'm not talking, let's say, in the next year, the next 2 years. It takes about 10 years to turn, and that's a minimum. It takes 10 years to turn things around because, I mean, the big problem with Europe there are a lot of problems with Europe, to be honest with you. There's a democratic deficit. There's the fact that nobody really understands how the whole thing runs or who's really in charge. Except, well, we do now. We know it's Germany. But the big problem, and this was the big problem with the euro as well, is that you had some very efficient countries in Northern Europe, countries like Germany, Belgium, Holland. And then you had all these countries like Ireland, Spain, Portugal, Greece, where people just sit in their asses, where the public sector is just absolutely inflated and overpaid. And to actually think that, during good times you won't see it as much. They can run along together, they can stroll along, but then bang, once you hit the wall, some are strong, some are weak.
You speak of a 10-year thing, though. Yeah. Do you think that Europe in its present form is even going to survive 10 years?
I think it's going to be. I won't say so much.
Will it be a two-speed?
It'll go one of two ways, I would imagine. It'll either go as a two-speed Europe, which might be the best option, to be honest with you. It would certainly be the best option for the people in Northern Europe. And then the other option is that they're just going to force more changes in Southern Europe and actually pull it closer together, both politically and financially.
I think you're right about the sort of reforms that we're talking about, and Irish people as well want to see the civil service faced down by the government. Wants to see the government actually take control. But that's
everybody in the public sector wants that, and particularly self-employed people.
But unfortunately, that's a national issue, and our government has shown total lack of leadership in facing it down.
That's why the Troika is a good thing in that way.
Yeah, but I think you're also correct in one way about Germany, and that there was a total deficit of vision from Germany, where Germany could have, in fact, proposed a whole new European system, a much deeper union.
A federalised system, essentially.
In a way, I mean, like, federalised system, okay, it depends to see what it has to be, but the problem with the euro currency as such is that it went halfway. It allowed national governments a certain measure of their own autonomy, whereas in fact a central bank had to be developed for this single currency, and it meant sacrificing a certain level of our independence that way. But look at where we are already. We've lost complete economic independence
through what has happened. As you said,
But Germany really should have shown a greater imagination and a greater generosity as well towards the countries who are unfortunately in this position now. What's seemed to be happening from Greece and Spain and Ireland is this sort of begrudging German, oh well, we've got to look out for the German people. I was thinking that those days were past, that we had to look for just the Irish people, just the German people. I thought this was a European project.
Yeah.
You know, at the end of the day, look, I'm going to bring out this final question. Look, do we think that Europe is a flawed system? Is it fucked? Because at the end of the day, I look at the system and I think to myself, you know what? We've got Greece potentially going down the toilet. We've got Italy. We've got Spain. We've got Portugal that could follow along behind it. Is it time to return to something like, you know, the European coal and steel community? Is it time to return to a political agreement on trade, but nothing more?
I don't want to make this personal, but I think it's a bit rich somebody from Britain talking about unity and economic independence when we have Scotland voting for its independence.
Well, let's not break out Scotland here, because those fuckers don't deserve anything.
Well, but I think that, I don't know, I think there's a vision for Europe, and I have no problem calling myself European or Irish as well.
Yeah.
You know, I think that.
Well, I mean, like, the way I look at it is, if there was a vote in the morning, here in Ireland, where people were given the choice, Europe, yes, no. My guess is that, you know, people would waver over the no thing for a moment or two, and then they'd think to themselves, on the one hand, they'd think about like the money that we could lose out in the future, all of that, all the money that we've got. But they'd also say, if I vote no to Europe, that means tomorrow morning, Enda Kenny will still be the Taoiseach. It'll still be Fine Gael, Labour, and maybe Fianna Fáil. And realistically, you know, how is that an improvement? How will we be better off if we're still going to be led by the same people, except we'll have access to less markets, less money?
And I think Irish people as well, they're quite able to remember the sort of Life of Brian quote. What have the Europeans ever done for us?
Yeah.
You know, roads,
absolutely.
sanitation, absolutely.
And that is that's a fantastic quote to end on. Thank you so much, Alan. Really appreciate you coming on. Tune in at fecttv.com. Thank you.